Ever face the frustration of planning a crucial lesson and having to deliver it on a specific day, only to find out that a significant number of students are absent? Or worse, despite a seemingly successful class, a significant portion of your students fail the assessment? Yeah. Of course, that's happened to me. As educators, navigating these challenges can be really daunting. Reteaching risks boring the rest of the class. After-school tutoring or lunch tutoring encroaches on our personal time. And relying on students to just figure it out independently really is a gamble. In this episode, I delve into a solution that many teachers, including myself, have found to be transformative. By eliminating traditional lectures, not only have I revolutionized, and I really mean that, how my students learn, but more importantly, I've positively impacted my own mental well-being. So today I'm going to share the 6 phases that transform my teaching from stress to success, including insights into my lesson planning strategies, how I manage the classroom, and more importantly, the results stemming from this really remarkable technique. If you're eager to move past the frustration of students missing key lessons, then be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and discover a new path to student success. As I've mentioned in 3 previous episodes, this year I transitioned to what is called the Modern Classroom Project, and I'll go ahead and link that in the description box so that you guys can catch up on those episodes. So basically, it's like a flipped model where students are getting the information they're learning via video, and they're also practicing in class with extra help from me, and it's just very much self-paced. When I decided to adopt this model, it actually took me a long time. I had to reframe the way that I saw teaching and how I saw the curriculum in general. So after learning about this model, I actually spent a couple of weeks just thinking and staring at past classes in Google Classroom, looking through all of my teaching materials that I regularly use, and trying to get an idea of how this was going to work, because my students wouldn't have me carrying them along and teaching them in real time the lessons. And that was just a really huge paradigm shift for me, because I'm just used to doing that whole like sage on the stage thing that a lot of us have learned and probably a lot of us still use. And also, as I was learning about this model through actual free courses through the Modern Classroom Project, I had to let go of my pessimism and skepticism and just that nagging feeling in my mind that was like, well, this isn't gonna work. Well, how is that going to work? And coming up with all these reasons why it would be a bad idea to do this, because I've always wanted to do something like this. And so I had to think about pacing from a different way. I had to structure the units and the lessons so that it could still be self-paced for the students and ensure that they were still learning. And it doesn't seem obvious that that would work, because maybe students are getting the videos but they're not actually absorbing the information. But at the same time, that could also be happening when you're giving lecture. One of the nice aspects of this model is that if students didn't understand it the first time, or maybe they spaced out in the middle of your lecture, they can actually rewind and go back and listen to it again. So I had to let go of that need for control by standing in the front of the room and making sure that we are all moving at the same pace at the same time, and really allowing myself to trust the students to progress as they see fit. So that was just the first phase. The next phase was also thinking about assessment and what that would look like in a self-paced model. As I was learning more through their amazing Facebook group, and of course, as I mentioned, the free courses that they have, I had to think about how am I going to find out if students are actually learning? Because it's one thing to just play a video, and it's another to actually see if they absorbed or learned anything from that video. Traditionally, I would have them just do a worksheet or work in groups or answer out loud in class, but they can't do that if they're all moving at a different pace. So I had to rethink formative and even summative assessments. In this model, I adopted what they call mastery checks, which are basically a fancy word for formative assessments, but it's just a checkpoint along the way to make sure that not only did the student watch the video and try to absorb it, but they also did the practice associated with it, and they actually somewhat mastered it. Sometimes students wouldn't quite completely master it, but I could tell that they knew enough to at least progress, and I knew that they would have more practice later on. So I let them move on. But it really serves two purposes. Not only for me to know that they did the lesson and did the practice, but also it's some accountability on part of the students. So if they didn't actually pay attention to the video, then they wouldn't pass the mastery check, and then they wouldn't be able to move on to the next part. In the beginning, I was creating so many mastery checks because I just wanted to make sure that they really were doing what they were supposed to do, but I was creating more work for myself. So around the second or third unit, I was a lot more thoughtful about the mastery checks because I wanted to make sure that they really showed whether or not students mastered even like a portion of the standard or skill that they needed to learn by the end of the unit. So it's just kind of like when you do have a concept that you want students to learn, you can break those up into parts, but they really need to know all of the parts combined in order to show mastery. So that's where I had to think about what type of formative assessments were really useful and also how I wanted to check these. I didn't necessarily want students to hand in work or submit work online. I wanted something that was maybe a little bit easier and more manageable for me. So a lot of times that would be in the form of short multiple choice quizzes that they could redo if they didn't pass, and it wasn't really that big of a deal if they didn't pass it right away because they could just maybe rewatch a previous lesson and then retake the mastery check. I also explored opportunities for meaningful practice and definitely embedding group work because I feel that my students work best and learn the best when they can struggle through a concept or idea with their group members. This would mean that I would have to create stopping points in the lesson where students had to wait until everybody else did catch up, and that was frustrating at times for the students, but I wanted to make sure that they all had the prerequisite information before they did the group work. Or sometimes with my units, I would start out with some kind of group activity where they would struggle together, and then they would proceed with the rest of the unit and all of the videos. So the third phase was actually putting all of these ideas together and creating a streamlined planning process. It did take a couple of units for me to get over the struggle of just like, what should a unit look like? But it started to flow better because I did what most of us do, which is work backwards. We think about the skill or the standard that we want them to learn. So let's say that I want them to learn how to write a race paragraph. And then I think about all of the little mini skills that they need to be able to do in order to successfully write that independently. I would work backwards, and that's how I would plan those units, which is pretty typical. But the hard part is making sure that there are enough practice opportunities and that the practice that they do complete is meaningful. What they also advocate is to have different types of learning opportunities based on what the students need. So we have 3 categories: must-dos, should-dos, and aspire to do's. The must do's are self-explanatory. These are activities that students have to do. The should do's are additional learning opportunities or additional lectures or additional lessons for students that didn't quite understand it. For example, with the first lesson on how to write a race paragraph, I demonstrated for the students how they were supposed to write it, and then they had to follow along and complete that. For students who didn't quite understand it the first time around, I had an additional practice where I wrote a different race paragraph so that they could see the format again without feeling like they were just sort of repeating the video. Because sometimes that first time maybe they didn't quite grasp it. Maybe the second time I explained it a little better, or just the extra practice really solidifies it for them. And then the last category is aspire to do's, and these are extension activities. I've only done a few of these, so the students who did forge ahead, I didn't necessarily want to create more work for them. I could have probably created something like other learning opportunities or just some interesting videos that they could watch, but this being my first year using this model, I decided to just stick with the must-dos and the should-dos. And a lot of times, most of the lessons are must-dos, if I'm being honest, and I'll probably embed more should-dos in the future. But this just really helps in terms of personalizing content for the students. But if they get to a mastery check and they realize that they didn't really understand it, they can go back to the should-dos. They can also rewatch the must-dos, but you eventually train students to know what it is that they need and to progress as they see fit. The next phase after all of this planning is creating the videos. And I'll be honest, It's kind of a tie in terms of which took up the most time, because planning does take a lot of time, and creating videos, it can take a lot of time if you are not technologically savvy. You can use videos that you find online, and I have used some of those depending on why I needed them. A lot of times it was just a screen recording of me teaching them the concept, or I would just use something like an app on my iPad or a screen share on my computer and teach them that way. I didn't put my face on any of these videos. I don't think it's necessary if you're teaching a concept, and you want to try to keep the videos fairly short. They recommend no more than 8 or 9 minutes, and I did my best to stay within that limit. In terms of my workflow after creating a video, there's a couple of different ways to do this. You could just post it to YouTube publicly and save it in the playlist that you send to your students. I personally save it as unlisted, and then I upload it to an online software called Edpuzzle, and you may have heard of this. And what's great about Edpuzzle is that you can embed questions within your video just to make sure that they are paying attention and not just pressing play and letting the video run. It's really great. And yes, I had to pay some of my own money. It's about $13, $14 a month for that. And it's not necessary to use it. I just found it to be really useful in terms of making sure and keeping track of who is watching the videos. I know that a lot of teachers like this option. So again, it's not necessary. And from there, I assign it through Google Classroom. And one thing about Google Classroom that I just found out about is that they are working on a function where you can upload videos to Google Classroom from YouTube, and within that you can embed questions. I don't know at the time of this video if it's working, then that could completely bypass the need for the Edpuzzle. So that could be really cool if you want to explore that route. So I use Google Classroom as my learning management system, and that's how I disseminate all of the units and all of the lessons, and of course I let them know about the videos. In an effort for me to not have to recreate all of these units in Google Classroom year after year, I did create a master course that just kind of stays there, and I just copy and paste from that master course into the different class periods that I have. So here's what this looks like in terms of disseminating the units. I'll create the units in Google Classroom, and what's great is that you can categorize it by units, and then I will post all of the lessons in there. Let's say that there's 7 lessons, lesson 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, something like that. I will schedule that to go out all at once so that students can move along as necessary. If there's a worksheet that's associated with that particular lesson, I will upload it as well. So everything just comes out all at once so that students can access the materials that they need as they are progressing through the unit. So Google Classroom is where students will get that information, and then they'll have to go to Edpuzzle to get the lessons. And this is really important because for me, they're going to 2 different places. So I do leave instructions for them in terms of where they're supposed to get the lesson or what it is that they're supposed to do next. So let's say that they're absent. They can go into Google Classroom and see what the next part of the unit is, and then they can just keep moving along if they want to try to keep up or catch up later on. One of the ways that the Modern Classroom Project ensures that students stay organized and on track is to have some kind of a personal tracker. So I create this where all of the lessons are laid out. And then also for me, I also put instructions on what it is that they're supposed to do. So it'll say, go to Google Classroom and download 1.3 and open it in Notability, which is the app that they use to annotate on their iPads. And then the next bullet point will say, go to Edpuzzle and open up the video 1.3 and watch it while you're completing the worksheet. Something like that. So it's very detailed in terms of what it is that they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go. And again, this makes it so that as they're moving through the lessons, they can just look on that tracker and see what it is that they're supposed to do next. And this tracker goes out when I disseminate all of the other lessons within a unit. So the next phase was figuring out how my classroom was going to run with this model, because that was really important. It was going to look very different than before. It's not going to be me teaching the same lesson for 5 periods in a row. It was going to be the students getting the lessons on video. Then I had to think about, what am I doing during this time? And how am I ensuring that they are progressing, especially for the students who are highly unmotivated? I had no clue what this was going to look like. So after some trial and error, this is how it does look like. At the beginning of class, I still do a warm-up with the students, and this is when I do something like grammar. I don't have just a unit for grammar because for me, grammar is ongoing. It's something that you have to kind of like chip away a little bit at a time if you really want it to stick. So we do some kind of grammar or sentence correction or whatever kind of warm-up that you like to do. We still do that at the beginning of the class, and that still allows me to engage with the students and they get to know me and I get to build that rapport and those relationships with them. When we start a new unit, I have them first download the unit tracker and we go through the entire unit and discuss all the different parts of it. The students definitely want to know what are the lessons that are in there, but they also want to know what are the mastery checks? What are they going to be responsible for needing to demonstrate to me in terms of their learning? Because that's what goes in the grade book. I also don't tell them where they need to finish for the day, but we do set some goals in terms of how far we think we should go. And I might say, okay, by the end of this class period, it would be a really good goal would be to get to 13.2. Or a really good goal would be to get to 14.5. It just depends on where we left off, and I had them sort of make a realistic goal in terms of where it is that they want to be by the end of the class period. And then they get to work. In the beginning of the year, I had students bring earbuds so that they could watch the videos or they could bring headphones, and not all of them bring those consistently, as you can imagine. I do have a set of earbuds that I got from the school and I loan them out to students. I'll give them a sanitizing wipe to clean before and after they use them. The students are working on the lesson, they're watching the video, they're doing the practice, and I'm circulating. And it's really amazing to be able to walk around and watch them work. It's something that when you are lecturing, you don't have the privilege of being able to do that. If you are walking around while you're lecturing, that could also be a little bit confusing for the students because they're trying to figure out where they're supposed to look. So here they're really focusing on the lesson and I get to look over their shoulder and I get to catch the students who are doing nothing, or I get to catch the students who are stuck and just staring, or the students who seem to have skipped too far ahead and they're not really doing the practice correctly. I just really get to clear up a lot of misconceptions and I get to know my students and get to know their level of preparedness. And it's just been really eye-opening. So you walk around the classroom and if you see a bunch of students making the same mistakes or they're confused or stuck on the same spot, you can pull those students aside and then you can have a group lesson with them, or you can just sort of reiterate or clarify things for them. It works out really well. The modern classroom project model really advocates for having a public-facing tracker where you display it on the board, like who's on what lesson. And I'm not at that point. I really just prefer to walk around and just see who's doing what and help them as I see fit. I don't really want to keep track of them that way, although a lot of teachers have had a lot of success with that. One of the benefits of having that kind of a tracker is that if students are on the same lesson, then they can go and sit by that person and work with them if they want to, but I'm just not quite there yet. Maybe we'll try that next school year. One thing that doesn't work with this model is sitting at your desk while students work. I learned this the hard way, because what happens is some of the students will just do something else because they think that you're not paying attention to them, or they'll get distracted, or they'll become unmotivated. It's just as if they were doing regular work and you were just sitting at your desk. There's something about circulating around the room and talking to them about what they wrote down, saying good job, asking them questions about what they did. And maybe not the entire time that you're walking around. I will just sit sometimes and just watch them and look for confused looks on their faces, or look for someone who decides to slouch in their seat and it's obvious that they're not paying attention, and I'll go and work with them. But I highly suggest that you don't see this as a replacement for engaging with your students. It's more a way of allowing them to move at a pace that works best for them. So the sixth phase of this was thinking about how all of these parts move together, especially when it comes to classroom management. Because here's the thing, just because students are allowed to be self-paced, it doesn't mean that they're working. In fact, there are a lot of times when students aren't working. If a student is already unmotivated in every single class, it doesn't mean they're going to be more motivated in yours. However, this does increase the chances of them at least learning some of the material, because if they decide that they're going to check out for 10 minutes, it's not 10 minutes during your lecture. It's just 10 minutes of class time, and then you can redirect them, and then you can have them still get the lesson. So it's beautiful that way. And are students going to talk when they're not supposed to? Yes, it doesn't solve all classroom management problems. However, it does mean that when one student is being disruptive, you don't have to stop the lesson to deal with them. The other students who aren't being disruptive get to keep learning, and it's great. And as I mentioned with the warm-up, it doesn't mean that you never get to have class discussions or that you can't have things like Socratic seminars or group work. You can absolutely still do that. But again, the learning part, the part where you were teaching them the new concept or reviewing the concept, it gets to happen on their own time, and it gets to happen whether or not they're in school or at home or out of town. So rethinking your role while the learning is happening, while you're not lecturing, it really does have an effect on classroom management. Because again, you can really be present. You are walking around, you are catching all of the little things that maybe you wouldn't be able to catch, or that the students would more likely get away with or try to attempt because of proximity to them, because you're at the front of the room and they're over to the side or the back. You being able to circulate around just really has a huge effect on the number of off-task behaviors that happen. So let's discuss the results from all of this happening, because yes, it's a great model, but is it actually effective? To determine this, I decided to look at my students' writing from last year as well as test scores. And here's something that kind of surprised me. Nothing changed. The scores weren't better, the scores weren't worse. The writing wasn't better or worse either. Now, does that mean that it didn't work? Absolutely not. That actually shows me that it does work. I'm still delivering the same quality of lesson. It's just via video. And if anything, I had fewer missing assignments with this model because the students were able to go back and learn the material and complete the assignment, compared to being absent and me somehow figuring out how to catch them up with a concept that I spent all class teaching them. So their scores didn't go up, but they also didn't go down, which I think is really significant considering that I am not standing at the front of the room lecturing them. And this was really huge. Now, as you can imagine, this model is amazing for catching up students. I've had students who just miss all kinds of school for whatever reason, and they can work on this when they're gone, and some of them do. They know that they just have to follow along the tracker, and they'll ask me, what are we doing when we're gone? Which is really silly to me, and I'll just tell them, we are progressing through the unit. And they can just work on it if they want to, and some of them do. And for those who don't work on it when they're gone, that's fine too. They can catch up when they're in class. But one thing that has been great is that when I have to teach them a major concept, something that we're going to use all the time, like the race paragraph, and they happen to be absent that day or just having a bad day and not focusing, or they're distracted or whatever, they can still get that crucial lesson. And if they didn't understand it the first time, they can watch it again. And in fact, I had a student who was gone all last week while we were writing a major essay. I was talking to his group members and I was like, wow, he's been gone all week. And one of his group members said, yeah, but it's a good thing that all the lessons are on video. So even my students recognize the power and the value in having these lessons be online so that they don't fall behind. I would say that some of the frustrations that I have with this model is that some students will deviate because they aren't following the lesson. They'll deviate because they're not following the tracker. They won't know what to do next, even though by now we're on 13 units and they still ask me, what should I do next? Just because you have it all laid out, it doesn't mean that students are going to be inherently organized. Also, some students just want to fast forward through the lesson and skip it because they're like, oh, I already know how to do this. And you can set that functionality in Edpuzzle so that they can't skip ahead, but then it can be frustrating if Edpuzzle is glitching and it sends them to the beginning and they were almost done with the lesson and now they have to watch it again. That's a technology issue, but it has been frustrating for my students at times. Also, we don't do as much group work as we have in the past, and I'm someone who really believes in the power of collaborative work. It's been a little bit harder to embed that, but I just have to be a lot more intentional than I have before. And it can get a little bit overwhelming at times when you have your students all over the place in a unit. They tend to move together at a similar pace, but you'll have a few outliers, and sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming and frustrating to keep track of all of those students, but I still find that it's valuable and worth it because the students that need to catch up or the students that are falling behind, it benefits them so much. I can't reiterate it enough. Now let's also talk about how this has been on me. So it's a mixed bag. Number one, it's a lot of work to have to create those videos. Not gonna sugarcoat it, but I only have to create the videos this year and reuse them from now on. Yes, I will tweak a couple of videos that didn't quite work out. I had a video where I did a screen recording and apparently it stopped recording all of my movements and just kept recording the audio. And I don't rewatch every single one of my videos, not gonna lie. And so the students caught it, which was pretty comical because all of a sudden 30 hands shot up in the air saying, you say that you're highlighting, but there's not actually any highlighting on the screen. So there are some glitches and some videos that I'm going to have to record, but for the most part, these lessons are done. It's pretty awesome. There's more work in that aspect, and then also the planning part and the disseminating everything, creating the tracker, all of that, a lot of work, but I'm only doing that work this year. However, in terms of my mental well-being, I can tell you that during actual class time, I am so much more relaxed. I am really loving getting to know my students, working with them one-on-one, walking around the room, helping those students that struggle and giving them so much more individualized time. It's just been so amazing for the students, and I've had discussions with them and they love it. There are a couple of students who do prefer the old school lecture style, and that's fine. And we do have some moments like that, like when we're doing grammar. But for the most part, the vast majority of my students really wish that their other teachers were doing this model. It's just been great for me. I don't have the Sunday scaries anymore because everything is planned out. I don't have to worry about what we're doing on Monday. What are we doing Monday? We're picking up where we left off on Friday. And that's just how it goes. So do I recommend that you do this? Sure, with one caveat. If you are someone who is a newer teacher, maybe not. Only because you don't know yet what it is that you want to do or that you need to do, and you're still learning. And I do see value in actually lecturing in front of the class when you're just starting out so that you can really learn about pacing and what works. I'm worried that if you aren't used to teaching yet, then your lessons might go by a little too fast or a little too slow. And until you kind of get used to how to pace your lessons for students to truly grasp it, I feel like you might want to hold off on this. I also would take it slowly if you are not someone who has a curriculum. So I know that a lot of you have a curriculum that you have to use, that you're forced to use, and you have to say certain things and do certain things on certain days. And this model will actually work really well with that because it's already planned out for you and you just have to go along and create the videos and the lessons for it. But if you're someone who's still creating your own curriculum because you were just told to teach, maybe you were given a textbook and you just have to kind of wing it, then you might want to take some time first to figure out your curriculum and then the following year create the lessons. That's just my recommendation. I know that with the Modern Classroom Project, they think that anyone can do this at any time, and just from my experience and the struggles that I went through, I would definitely hold off if you fall into those two categories. However, you can also go in the Facebook group for the Modern Classroom Project, and so many people are just willing to just give you their materials, to give you their pacing guides and their trackers. And it's just so supportive of a community that if you just want to kind of poke around and lurk and see what other people are doing and maybe try it for like 1 or 2 classes or 2 subjects if you teach elementary, then you can do that. And I can tell you, there are elementary teachers that are doing this. So if you're skeptical as an elementary teacher, you just need to go to the Modern Classroom Project website, and they have a course for how those teachers do that, and also go into the Facebook group to get additional help. I would love to know any episode suggestions that you have. I want to make content for you that is valuable to you right now, especially with whatever it is that you're struggling. So be sure to comment below and let me know about any topics that you'd like me to cover. Now, if you just want to know more nitty-gritty details in terms of how this works for other people and how the co-founder of the Modern Classroom Project came about to this model, then be sure to click on this video next to learn more about that.